was riddled with fear. I was riddled with self-doubt. I knew that I was no good. I didn't even know I was transitioning, right? I didn't even know that that's what was happening, because if I go as far back as I can remember, I go to the 5-year-old version of myself. I'll just use that as the example of a transition, because for myself is where the power comes in, to see the transition of the thoughts that 5-year-old had about himself into recreation of what this man says here today has, the thoughts he has of himself. See, thoughts create our life. You can't not create what you think about. It's just not possible. That 5-year-old, what he knew was, and look, and I think everybody has a 5-year-old version of themselves in them. They don't know. There's layers and layers. I've said to you before, I believe that I'm one of the greatest transformations, work in progress, walking on the planet. That 5-year-old kid, what he knew was that he had made some decisions at 5. I knew that I was no good. I knew that you couldn't trust people. I knew I was not safe. And so I was riddled with fear. I was riddled with self-doubt. I knew that I was no good. It's interesting, and I say interesting, I don't know if that's the correct language to use, but I had a brother and sister that didn't live long.
I'm Art Blanchford, and this is Life in Transition. Welcome to the next episode of Life in Transition podcast. Today, our guest is Bob Hurd, and Bob is a coach who works with high performers to help them be the more they know they can be by cleaning up the mess in their mind. He is also a grandfather, an entrepreneur, and a former Navy submariner. So Bob, most welcome to the Life in Transition podcast. Glad you are here.
Hey, thank you, Art. Good morning. It's good to see you. It's good to be with you.
Yeah, good morning. Before we even get started, I love the presence you bring through on LinkedIn, a thoughtful post that you have and the presence and beingness that shows through. It's hard for things to show through on a computer and on social media, but I think you really do a good job at that. And I really love seeing what you have to say there. And I love your thoughtful reflections that come in there.
Hey,
so I really appreciate that. Jumping in then, Bob, what would you consider to be one of the most interesting, meaningful, transformational transitions that you've been through in your life, Bob?
That's a loaded question, Art.
It is. That's why this is a great podcast, Bob.
Yeah. Thank you so much for what you do and the difference you make. That question, I've thought a bit about that this morning. And what I realized, Art, in that question that you're asking about, this transition in my life that I've been through that might have made the most difference, or the one that sticks out to me most, is when I think of my whole life has been a transition. So I didn't even know I was transitioning, right? I didn't even know that that's what was happening, because if I go as far back as I can remember, I go to the 5-year-old version of myself. I'll just use that as the example of a transition, because I think that's for myself is where the power comes in, to see the transition of the thoughts that 5-year-old had about himself into recreation of what this man says here today has, the thoughts he has of himself. See, thoughts create our life.
Yep.
You can't not create what you think about. It's just not possible. That 5-year-old, what he knew was, and look, and I think everybody has a 5-year-old version of themselves in them. They don't know. There's layers and layers. As I've said to you before, I believe that I'm one of the greatest transformations, work in progress, walking on the planet. That 5-year-old kid, what he knew was that he had made some decisions at 5. I knew that I was no good. I knew that you couldn't trust people.
Mm-hmm.
I knew I was not safe.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was riddled with fear.
Yep.
I was riddled with self-doubt.
Yeah.
I knew that I was no good. It's interesting, and I say interesting, I don't know if that's the correct language to use, but I had a brother and sister that didn't live long.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the youngest, and I've got two brothers.
What age were they when they died, Bob?
They didn't make it to their first birthdays.
Okay.
So their first year, they were lots of health issues, and neither one of them made it. My mother was not to have any more children. My father would have been her second marriage. So by the time my mom is in her mid-20s now, I'm number 6. Right. So I come from a good Catholic family.
All right.
And what I know, looking back at those times, and I heard this growing up often, was, that I was a miracle child. Like, my mother was not supposed to have children. Now, remember what I just told you, this 5-year-old decided. I decided I was no good. My father didn't want me. He left. I didn't meet my father until much later in life. And I knew that there was something wrong with me. And I got somebody trying to convince me that I'm some miracle child. And what I hear when my mom would say that you're a miracle, like that you being here is a miracle, what I heard was, your brother and sister, they didn't make it. I don't know how we got stuck with you. Now, think about the heaviness of that as a child.
Yep.
It really shaped my life.
Yep. How old were you when you realized that you were still, because all of us have a 5-year-old, some version of that, all of us. And that part of us influences us, drives our behavior much more than we know until we know it. So how old were you when you recognized you were still being driven by this 5-year-old with this belief system that the 5-year-old hadn't installed in him or installed in himself based on the circumstances he was growing up?
That's a great question.
Do you have any time when you remember thinking, wow, these behaviors are still affecting me today?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I'll answer your question. I think that I always knew that was there. I think I did what many people do without knowing they're doing it. I went out into the world and when I got these feelings going on, see, it's the occurrence of how I see myself. Just think about, I believe that in the world of transformation, that the only thing a person needs to work on is who they're being. Mm-hmm. Being produces what I do. There's no way around this. The being comes first. And we live in a world that we learn how to do things. We think, go read another book, go get another trick or tweak something.
So you went out into the world and just started doing without realizing what was driving you, without realizing who you were being. You went and started doing, like almost everybody does.
That's right. What I realized is, and look, the heaviness of what I shared with you, and that's just one example. There were so many examples that were like that in my life, and I carried this stuff. And what I knew was, if I could go out and do enough things and create success, of course, that would go away because I'd proved to myself without knowing that I was proving. I said, I didn't know I was doing this. This is
right. So you're acting out of this without realizing it, saying, when I create this ideal image of myself, make money, be a success in terms of what society says, then I'll be okay inside. Then I will no longer be this horrible feeling of 5-year-old not enough.
That's right.
Where my father left me and so forth. So that was driving you. And so you went out into the world and did those things. What I'm curious about is, if you fast forward, if you play back the reel of your life, like, where was the time when you realized, and for most people it's in midlife, though some people it's not, but where you realized, wow, this kid has been driving me, this part of me has been driving me in ways and behaviors that worked for him when he was 5, but they're no longer serving me at what time? Did you ever have that type of realization, or how did you come to know that this 5-year-old was driving you? Because you clearly know it now.
Yeah. That wasn't a one-time flash. See, your question is a brilliant question, and it wasn't like a one-time flash. I started to see things. For example, I would become like number one in my field. This is my 3rd career, military, entrepreneur, as a leadership performance coach. Each career I've had, I went to the top. In the military, what I realized at that time was I'd go to the top and be the number one guy in what I did and get recognition and get awards and have all these medals and all this. And I'm in this question because it's not doing anything for me.
It doesn't make your inside feel any better.
Yeah.
When you get the accolades.
Yeah, so I'm confused. And this confusion continues on because, see, what I know inside, and I believe this inside of every human being, is there's this seed, this desire for more. Mm-hmm. And what it shows up for, at least in my mind, was desire for more, but I need to be more. Meaning there's something missing. There's something wrong.
I'm not enough as I am.
Yeah.
I need to be fixed.
I'm just like destined to be like this no matter what I accomplish in my life. I'm destined to be like this. And when I reconfigured that.
And Bob, what was the like this? I'm destined to be like this. Unpack that one later. What was the like this?
Yeah. Well, broken.
Okay. So feeling bad inside, broken.
Yeah.
Not enough, distraught, distressed, depressed, despair.
And not even knowing it. See, this is the fascinating. If you would have known me, there wouldn't be anybody that would know what I'm sharing with you, because I always had a smile on my face. I've always been the optimist, always just how I roll, man. I'm like, I see the good in all things. I'm able. And I remember, so this, to answer your question, when I was in the Navy, I was stationed on a submarine with one of my brothers. And see, he had a similar background. He took some, maybe more so than I, they took some vicious beatings when they were children, man, both of my brothers. And it affected them in some ways that were.
And that was from fathers or stepfathers or?
Yeah, I think mainly most of that was from my father, actually. Mm-hmm. But my brother and I were overseas. I don't even remember what port we were in. He shared with me, he had some drinks that evening, and he shared with me something, Art, and I'll never forget this. And I understand it today, because if I'm there's something wrong with me. It doesn't matter what I do, I'll find something. People say sabotage it, but it's not like that. There's something wrong with me. I got to prove internally, subconsciously, you're going to prove there's something wrong with you. And usually what that means is you're going to blow up whatever you've done great so you can go do it again. And so my brother, he shared something with me that night. He said, little bro, he said, this is just what life is like for us. And he had just gotten himself in and out of a pretty major jam. It would have turned out way different, but somehow he worked his way through it, and it turned out just fine. And what he said to me that night, Art, was that this is just the way it is for guys like us. Is we go out in the world and we create really cool things, and then we destroy it. And then we do it all over again. And I remember that night, I was probably about I was around 23 or 24 years old. And I remember the thoughts that night. Man, I thought, wow, that does not sound like much fun.
Yeah. To build something and then destroy it.
And what I understand today is, and again, when I go back to the being, see, if I'm being that there's something wrong with me, if I'm being I'm a failure, it doesn't really matter. The doing is going to be consistent with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to produce it subconsciously. It's like a fish in the water. A fish doesn't know it's in the water, man. It doesn't even know. Subconsciously, I don't know where I'm coming from. There's something wrong with me. I'm a failure. It's always going to be this way. When you come from that place, you're bound to have some messes. And that's what life was like for me. It was messy. I start my day off pretty simply. I create who I'm going to be when I wake up in the morning, and then I practice being that throughout the day. One of my declarations is I am that I have a mind that's full of peace. Mm. And boy, I tell you what, that's a long ways from
5-year-old and the 24-year-old.
Yeah, well, look, and the 40-year-old and the 50-year-old. It's been gradual. So your question, like, when did the thing happen? Well, I don't know. It's been gradual. I still see things. Things show up in me, and I'm like, I'm being afraid again. What's happening? Well, it's a judgment. Mm-hmm. It's a judgment. And so what's happened is over time is I've created a relationship with my own thinking. So I can see my thoughts and recreate them in real time. So they don't run me, because that 5-year-old run my life.
Right. It's great that you've had that realization. I think most people are being run by their 5-year-old and 6-year-old and 3-year-old and 7-year-old and 13-year-old and 19-year-old and don't know it, right? We have all these parts of ourselves that, due to some trauma or another, split off and had survival strategies that worked at that point, but we still are run by them. If we get in touch with those parts at all, we tend to think they're bad instead of appreciating them and learning from them and helping them to heal and reintegrate. I realized at 49 that I was being run by this 5-year-old. I had an epiphany. And now, I mean, of course, I saw a lot of things along the way and saw behaviors and worked on a lot of stuff, but I realized how much that had been driving me in my career when I was 49 years old. That story is in episode 7 of this podcast. But
that's amazing.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. So your transformation, your transition really is about, if I'm hearing you right, was about coming into this understanding of your thoughts, and that your thoughts really drive you, and that you have some control, or you have some agency with your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that you don't have to be run by the 5-year-old or by anything else. Viktor Frankl says you have the gap between stimulus and response, and there's something with that. And then you started to do normal processes that helped you to change the thoughts. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, that's beautiful.
When did you start with what you would consider your morning practices, or your process, Bob, that really helped you to become the being, to embody the being that you want to be, not the one that you were by default by survival?
Yeah, I think that probably started around 2010, and it's continually been upgraded along the way.
Of course, yeah.
And I'll share with you, and I found some old notebooks here a few months ago. I was preparing for a talk, so I started going through a bunch of old notes, and I found these notebooks that were just full of I am statements. And they were back in that 2012 to 2014 time period. There was some success in that practice.
Yeah.
I'll do my best to put some language to it to say that there were some improvements. But the thing that was necessary for me to go beyond just that was to get to the root. See, in the work that I do with humans is that we look to build foundations, a place to come from. See, not a place to get to. It's not the things you get in life, it's who you become. That's all that matters, because once you become something, you can't take that away from you. You can go recreate whatever there is outside of you. So I had these I am statements that I would write every morning, and many times, like 10 times each, and I found them. And what I realized was, it was really useful, but what I hadn't taken care of at that time was what was under them. See, I still had the limiting beliefs. I still had the doubt. I still had the fear. I still had the weakness. See, I had this innate weakness in me where I was coming from. And so even though there was some success in that, over time, what I've come to realize is I had to get into the roots, which was really a process of understanding my reoccurring thoughts and starting to see where the judgments of myself, the fear. See, fear is, look, this is such good news, because you can't not create, right? So when you think about fear, now I get, short of, somebody goes into a casita there and puts a gun to your head, or someone comes into my office, puts a gun to my head. That's natural. There's going to be some fear.
That's real survival fear at that point.
Yeah, that's what it's designed for, right? Like, I got to protect myself, but it's not designed to be afraid about, standing in front of a group of people, or it's not designed to be afraid of what Art's going to think of me. It's not designed for that. So the good news is that what that means is I was creating fear. And it was my thoughts that were creating it. And if I can create fear, then I can create love. See, two opposites.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to start to see that the fear I was creating, the doubt I was creating, the weakness I was creating, it was created in my thinking. It wasn't real. So the good news is if I can create one, I can create the other.
That is very good news.
Yeah, it's great news because, wow, I got something that, like you said a few minutes ago, I have some ability to change my thinking. I have some control over it. I have there's some opportunity in this. Oh, if I can create a life that's full of insanity and messes, I can use the same power that I created that and create a life that's full of peace. So it's all creation. So what I realized is I had to get in and I had to start to work with those thoughts that were running in me. I didn't even know they were there. Like I said, you just kind of resign.
This is what you refer to as the root, is this pattern, this tape, this program that's running in us.
Yes.
And as you said, you didn't even realize that you were being run by this program. And you didn't even realize it was running you.
That's right.
And again, a lot of people are in that space. I know I was, right?
How can you know?
Yeah.
See,
how can you know? You're just busy doing, right? Living your life. Yeah.
And in the world we live in, the outside world, you look just like everybody else. It's like you're totally oblivious, totally asleep to what's happening.
Right. So how did you make that shift? How did you come to that realization of, wow, I create the fear. I can create something else in here.
It's common sense. That's like asking, is the sun bright? What color is white rice?
But it is, and in some ways it is common sense, but I think it's a legit question because
it is.
A lot of people are in fear and they don't know that there's something they can do about it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, well, there's an awareness. And look, I've been blessed. I've been blessed in my life. I always had so much fear. Even I remember and I'll answer your question. So when I come across this, I had so much fear. When I was in the Navy, I got pegged to be a Navy recruiter, for example. Okay, well, dude, I'm a country kid. I grew up in a small community, which we didn't hang out with people. We worked. I knew how to work really hard. I was taught that. I mean, I worked from the time I was very young, and worked hard. I look back at it and it's served me because it allowed me to have all these non-useful thoughts that I've shared with you and still have some success in life because I knew how to work and how to get things done.
Man, I'm raising my hand on all of those things. I'm right there with you, 100%.
So what happened was you go back into the late 80s when I was a Navy recruiter. See, I had all this fear because I'm like, what am I going to do? I got to go talk to people.
Mm-hmm.
And in the way that I grew up, the only time I could talk to people is if I had a few cocktails.
Right.
A few cocktails, I'm good. But, you can't go to the local high school and have a few cocktails. I suppose you could, but I mean, it didn't cross my mind.
You wouldn't last long in your job.
Yeah. So I started to read and I started to listen. I say more listen to back then it was cassette tapes.
Yeah, listen to tapes. Yeah.
Yeah, like Zig Ziglar and Earl Nightingale, Napoleon Hill. I started to listen to some of the old, and I started to learn something about what your question is like. See, knowing that there's still feels like there's something there that's shouldn't be there, not knowing how to get rid of, but eventually over the course of years of doing that it's became so clear that it's just thoughts. Thoughts create my life. I can alter my thoughts. I can change my life. It's that simple. And so the recreation, so to answer your question it's been over the past years. I mean, it's been gradual.
Right. But it started with listening to somebody else's experience that told you something else is possible.
That's right.
And that started this awareness of hey, I can actually shift this. I don't have to be a victim to my old program. Oh, I have an old program. I don't have to be a victim to having a few cocktails.
Yeah.
Right? To realize that there was another path as a possibility is when that started, which was what brought to you by these other guys, Zig Ziglar, who I've met, great guy.
Yeah.
And Napoleon Hill, I've read a lot. I haven't listened to, but I've read a lot. So that's where the process started for you.
It started, and I've been blessed, Art. There's a lot of good people in my life. So what I'm going to say something right now is that, anything that I say, I'll just say thank you to all the people that have served me over the years because, most of what I'm saying is I've learned.
Yeah.
I have an excellent coach in my life, right?
Yeah.
That helps me go looking.
Yeah.
And the only conversation that we ever have, is about being.
Yeah. I think I know that coach. I think I have the same one.
Well, it might be a different one than the one you're talking about, but yes, I know who you're talking about. I go and I fly and see him every 2 weeks.
Wow. And you're focused on just who are you being?
That's all. That's the only question.
This episode of the Life in Transition podcast is brought to you by Midlife Transition Mastery. If you have reached midlife and you are successful, you have checked all the boxes, you've done everything you thought you should do, and especially pleasing everybody else, doing what you think everyone else needs you to do, but you still feel like something's missing, like you're coming up empty, feeling alone, feeling misguided or lost. Midlife Transition Mastery Explorer community is for you. Here we will build authentic community, We will learn about the 8 steps to mastering midlife transition, and we will learn and execute living life with no regrets in our second half. Please check out the community on lifeintransition.online/MLTM, Midlife Transition Mastery. And I look forward to seeing you around the fire in this community. Take us through that process for you now.
Yeah.
Bob, like when you have a session with him or when you're working on who you are being, because I agree with you that it's the foundation of everything. And I agree that I don't know if I agree, I'm putting this in from my experience. It's also tough. Like the work is not easy, right? So what does it look like when you're in working on who you are being? What does that look like?
That's a greent question. Well, see, it's funny how the mind goes, because the reality is, gosh, I wrote this down a couple of weeks ago, and I was just like, it was like a bell went off inside of me. I'm like, okay, if I commit myself fully to working on this man and who he's being, and I use the waking hours to practice that. And then before I go to sleep, I recreate who I'm being again. I read, write, and I practice in between. There comes a time that there's no need for thinking. Like there's no thinking. When this came over me, Art, it was like a flash. I thought, oh my goodness, this is the best news I've ever come across, is that I could actually stop thinking. And most people might hear that like, well, you got to think, Bob, like that doesn't make any sense. Well, I know it's not natural to say that, but no thinking, like just being, because the being, if I'm being brilliant, I'll do brilliant things. And people say that sounds too simplified. No, it is that simple, because if I'm being that, I used to get called a stepfather, I think one of his favorite names that he called me was an idiot. Mm-hmm. And so I had idiot like running inside of me all the time. And
on your forehead there.
Yeah. And I would do things and it would say, God, and I said, yeah, there it is. There's more evidence.
It's reinforcing the pattern. Yeah. Look, I'm an idiot.
So if I'm being an idiot, I'm going to do things that aren't that smart. They're going to look silly. Right. So in the reshaping of answer your question, what does it look like? Well, it doesn't matter what we might bring into the session. Is all we're working with is the mind, the thoughts. So I'll give you an example. The last week I was there, I was preparing for a talk with some implant dentists. And in my past, what that might look like was it would be some kind of strategy session on what to say. And there's a lot of pressure behind that, like what to say. I got to get it right. I want to make sure.
You got to have your speech, got to have your words.
I got to get it nailed. I got to get, so much that got there. And that produces an energy about it. Mm-hmm. It produces like a message that there's something wrong. It's not enough. I got to get this right. And so when we would go in.
Somehow your identity is attached to the outcome of what they think about you and your performance in that speech.
Absolutely. It's natural.
That's the doing part.
Yeah.
The thinking part, right?
Yeah.
And so then what's the being? So then take us to the being part instead, Bob.
Okay. So now we're going to go and we're going to prepare to be with Art. We're going to go prepare to be in the room with the implant dentist. I don't have to think about what to say. All I'm doing is I'm working on who I'm going to be in the room, and who I'm going to be in the room, and who I'm going to be on this podcast today is I'm here to love and I'm here to serve.
So that's the beingness that you're holding on to, that you're being love, you're being service.
That's right. I'm being loved. I'm being service. I am that when I speak, the world lights up. I am that I use my past. See, my past is a gift. Mm-hmm. And for most of my life, my past was like and I look at some of my other family members. They're not living the life I'm living.
Yeah. They haven't had the growth that you've had. I've
gotten lucky in so many ways. I've been so loved. And for the kid that felt unloved, it was unlovable. I'm like one of the most loved. I think I can say it even. I'm the most loved man on the planet.
Is that from your wife, kids, grandkids, all the
everybody.
Above?
That's the world, man.
Yeah.
It's the world I live in. So I'm creating who you're going to be. Is when I speak, the world lights up. I use my past to build, lead, teach, and inspire. Mm-hmm. See, I'm coming from that place. I'm going to give what I have. I'm going to talk from my soul. See, and that's freedom. See, that's the freedom to not be thinking about, like, is this going to get me 20 likes, or is this going to get, am I going to get something from this? No, I don't need anything. And I might get something, but it's not the point. So is that responsive to your question, like what it looks like to work on your being?
Yeah, absolutely. It's about who I am, how I'm showing up, and not what I might get or what people are think or what the reaction's going to be.
Yeah. Well, see, the universe will never let you down, Art.
Say more about that, Bob.
Well, it's not possible. See, the laws of the universe are quite clear. If you go out in life and you decide that, and I believe this about you, is that your mission in life is you're a man that makes a difference. And you're not calculating that. That's my experience. If you're not calculating, like you're going to go have breakfast this morning, you're going to go have lunch today, you're not going to be different with them than you are with me. See, and that's not common. See, that's very uncommon. So if my mission in life is I've shared is to love and serve, I'm not picking and choosing. Now, it doesn't mean I walk down the street and I stop people and try to, like force feed them something. It doesn't look like that.
Right.
But it looks like I'm available and I'm in a thought. I'm coming from loving and serving. What could I do to make a difference this morning? What could I do? What's present to me, what I know about the laws of the universe is, see, you reap what you sow. It's not possible not to. If you go out and you just serve, you serve, you serve. See, it's like planting trees. The guy that, and I won't get this perfect, but you'll get the picture, is that it's like you plant seeds and we're going to raise trees and we won't ever use the shade of the tree.
Right.
But we know that we create to create, not because I'm going to get something, because it's going to serve somebody out in the future. And see, when a person comes from that place, the universe, it will serve you. It's just the way it works. There's no way around it.
Yeah. So a couple of things. One, I want to say thank you for seeing me, because that's true what you said. And I really appreciate that you see me. Thank you. The second thing that I think about is, you're planting trees that, and this is a good correlation, you're planting trees that you may never be big enough while you're alive to enjoy the shade. But you're also enjoying the shade of trees that other people planted.
That's right.
And that's how the universe is taking care of you.
That's right.
Right. And then we do our part, and then we also have the reciprocal, right? That we're taken care of, even if we don't know exactly what that looks like. Maybe it's not shade that we need that day. Maybe it's sunshine or water or whatever, but that's there for us if we're also doing, I say doing, but to come back to your word, if we're being the being that we were meant to be.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. That's really powerful, Bob. That's really powerful. And that's what I feel comes through, and like what I see of your presence online. What is the main thing that you feel like you have learned in this long transition? And maybe something we've already covered, and then you could just restate it quickly, but like, what is something that you feel like, seeing that you have these other parts, starting with the listening and realizing you have the choice, and now to this point of knowing that your being is much more important than your doing? What is the main takeaway over those, I'm going to say 20 years of experience? Of course, it's been more than that, but that's sort of the part that we've talked about the most here. Yeah. What was your main learning?
Dude, I'm powerful beyond measure. I am that I can create anything. I'm unstoppable. There's nothing out of reach. There's no limits.
No, that's beautiful, Bob. I mean, I love that. I'm powerful beyond measure, right? And to really own that and live into that. If you look back to your younger self 20 years ago or so, is there something that you would tell them now that to have them do differently, or to help them along the journey even more? You've had a really interesting, inspiring journey, but is there something you would tell the 20-year younger version of yourself 20 years ago that would help him even more along the journey?
That kid, I would want that kid to love himself. I would want that kid to learn how to forgive himself. I would want that kid to have some compassion. Mainly, Art, I'd want that kid to know he's loved. He's wanted.
So if you're talking to that kid, whatever age they are now, that's listening right now on this podcast, how would you advise them to start to love themselves?
Well, look, it starts with the thoughts. I'd go right to the thoughts. See, language, if a person slows himself down a bit, to answer your question, is that when we speak, we tell the people, if you're listening, you can hear what's happening for the person. See, words come out of people's mouths, and if you listen intently with an intention to love and serve them, you'll hear things they don't know they've said. So what that does is, to answer your question, you get some idea about what's running in the background. Not like precise, because again, every human being's different. It's not a one size fits all. So you would have a conversation. And look, you can see, and I believe that to answer your question, if I'm being that I'm there to serve this 20-year-old, I'm being that I'm there to hear them. I think that that's one of the things, and as I prepare myself to continue to evolve and grow, is that I want them to know it's okay to speak. It's okay to tell people who you are. You don't need to hide. There's nothing to be afraid of. Like, there's so much I would want that kid to know. And to know you're more than you can possibly imagine. And that's so true. It's true of you, it's true of me, and it's true of anyone walking this earth. Is they're much more than they can possibly comprehend, than they'll ever be able to comprehend. The fears and the doubts, see, they're just thoughts. And if we can play with those a little bit, we can reshape them. And man, you can create anything. So we'd go back to what I've discovered, I believe, to be the most useful thing, is we'd work on their being. We'd work on recreating how they see themselves.
So they start with having love and compassion for themselves.
Oh, right? Yeah, for sure. Because look, if I can be that for me, I can be that for you.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. This episode of the Life in Transition podcast is brought to you by Transition Mastery Coaching. If you have made it to midlife and you're successful and you are going through transitions in your life, in your business, in your career, or in your organization, and you are looking to master those transitions, to make the most of them, to accelerate into the next phase of your organization or your life. If you're facing challenges in your business, challenges in your relationship, challenges in your health, and you really want to transition those quickly, I'm here to guide you for that. And I look forward to working with you. And you can sign up for either Pinnacle Transition Coaching or Summit. Please go to lifeintransition.online/MLTM and scroll to see the Summit and Pinnacle Coaching, or reach out to me directly on my email, art@artblanchford.com. And I look forward to connecting with you and helping you to accelerate your transitions to achieve what it is that you want to achieve in the second half in your organization and in your life, so you can live your whole life with no regrets. Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. I know for me, one concrete action that I did that to really help to start to love myself, as corny as this sounds, there's a book by Kamal Ravikant, I couldn't think of his last name for a second, called Love Yourself Like Your Life Depends on It, because it does. And when I read that book, I started doing one of the processes that he did, which is just to look in the mirror really close, so all I can see is my eyes, and to say, I love you, or I love myself, or I love you, Art Blanchford, for 5 minutes straight with nothing else going on. And
Wow.
Every time I did that, I either came to laughter or tears or both.
Yeah.
Every time. And it really made this strong connection with myself. Yeah, that's one tool that I have found that really has made a difference for me, that I think could make a difference for anybody. And it seems sort of, whatever, absurd or crazy or whatever, try it and see what happens, and see how that makes a difference to loving yourself.
Well, look, so Art, what you just said, your question about, and what you said about being loving.
Mm-hmm.
So think about, we're going to go back to being again, because it instructs the doing.
Yep.
So what I can tell you about my life is I had a lot of destructive behaviors. Like, really, if you've seen the man that you see here today, if I give you a photo of the guy 20 years ago, you would say that there's no way that these two guys are the same.
Wow.
But see, it's not possible. So there was a lot of destructive behaviors in so many ways. And so it's common sense, right? Again, is that obviously there's something happening in that man.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're being loving, you do things that are loving. You do things, right?
Right.
The destructive behaviors, they handle themselves. They don't have to think about, how do I
get to a place where you are being love and being loving?
Yeah.
You are going to take loving actions toward yourself as well. If you really get to that centered point, you're not going to put a lot of drugs and poisons in your body, and you're not going to, you're going to honor and take care of yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, you're going to get a good night's sleep. You're going to exercise. You're going to eat well. You're going to be kind to people. You're going to be kind to yourself. You're going to dress a certain way. It just handles everything.
Another thing that I was just thinking about yesterday. So yesterday I took a day off. I went up to the mountains here. I love the mountains. Cool. Aspens are in full bloom. And I knew this waterfall up by Williams Lake that is just a great waterfall. It's not too popular, and I could hang a hammock. So I went up there with a book and a journal. And as I was starting to leave, my sleeping bag was in the truck because I was planning to camp overnight, but I decided not to. And I thought, should I take that or not? And there's part of me, nah, it's heavy. And then I asked myself a question. If I deeply loved myself, what would I do? And I thought, well, I'll take the sleeping bag, because if it is cold up there, and it might be, we're going to be 11,000 feet in October, then I'd be glad I have the sleeping bag. And if I carry 3 extra pounds, who cares? And it was so wonderful. I took 2 naps in the hammock in the sleeping bag yesterday in the shade by this creek. So just little questions like that. Like, if I'm being loving, the right answer comes to me. And that was an example I hadn't even thought about, but I was being loving toward myself. And then I took it with me. And otherwise, I still would have had a good day, but I would have been in the sun, and I wouldn't have gotten the rest that I wanted to have too, being in the mountains, because the hammock, there's no place for the hammock in the sun. It is in the shade where the trees are, of course. I love that. And that question's another good one to help shift my way of being, is if I love myself deeply, what would I do in this situation?
Yeah. Beautiful.
So that's really amazing. So in thinking about the destructive behaviors that you used to have, Bob, where would your life be now if you hadn't made this transition, if you hadn't had this realization that being is the bottom line above thinking, and that you have the chance to change it? Where would your life be today? Yeah,
look, that's a challenging question. I would be unhappy. I'd been able to have all that nonsense in my life and still create a life that I would say that I was so blessed, had created success in 3 careers, but the happiness and the freedom, see, that's what I would say. I wouldn't have that. At least that's my belief. I could have all the things, but still know inside that I was meant for more. So I'm still.
And it's interesting. You've said that meant for more many times. And when I first heard it, I recoiled a little bit, But now I'm starting to see that meant for more has nothing to do with more money or more career success.
That's
You're
right.
meant for more beingness,
That's
more
right.
love, more acceptance, more openness in your heart. And I
Yeah.
think that's such a powerful thing is that you simply said I would be unhappy. So many of us are walking around in our life that looks perfect on the outside, but we're unhappy. We're not okay on the inside. And there's nothing more important than that. But most of us don't know how to start the path to be okay on the inside.
Yeah.
And that's why we see so many addictions and deaths of despair, and even right up to full-on suicides of even people that look like they have everything. That I've seen way too much of that in my life as well.
Me too.
So how would you start somebody that is doing all the things they think are right? They've had the success that you're talking about, maybe, or maybe they haven't, but they know that they're not happy inside. What's the step they can take? What's something they can do now to start down that path? And of course, as we talked about in the beginning before we recorded, it's always a work in progress.
Yeah.
And the suffering never ends completely at all. But like you said, if you look back 20 years, you're a completely different guy than you were 20 years ago. You're still a work in progress, 100%.
Yeah.
So there's no Pollyanna, but what's a step that they can take now to start to move in the sense of being who they want to be?
Again, we go back to thinking. And how do you start? What you create a relationship with your thoughts.
And how do you do that? How do you create a relationship with your thoughts?
We all have reoccurring thoughts, but we got to slow down a bit to notice them. Because again, the fish in the water,
right?
They've been running so long, we don't even know they're there. So how do you recognize them? Well, again, you slow down a bit and you start to ask questions of yourself, like where you get slowed down at, what's this thing that you would really want? See, most people have a desire. They have something so big in them that they're afraid to tell anybody about. There's a lot of places to start to answer your question, a lot of places to begin, but the thoughts create my life. So I want to start with that.
So you want to slow down to recognize your thoughts. So the first thing you said is awareness of your thoughts, but how do you slow down? Like if somebody hasn't done it yet, what does it mean? Like to slow down and be aware of your thoughts?
Well, that's a great question. Look, it's not one size fits all, but
sure.
I think we built some foundation to start with. And so foundation is to understand that, see, it's easy to see what thoughts do, like in my relationship with you. I have a listening for you. See, I have a listening for you. And when you speak, I listen to you through that. And my listening is you're an extraordinary human being. You're gifted. You're talented. You're making a difference in the world. You're here for something much bigger than you know yet. See, I'm listening from that place. We have listenings. We make them up. We don't know we make them up.
Right.
So with a person, the beginning would be to start to look at the listenings they are of themselves. Because, see, it's easy to see them with another person because you've created them, but you don't think you've created. You think that's just the way they are.
Right.
So you start to back that up a bit. Where do you show up that's just the way you are? Like my example, the way that I am is that I'm not smart. See, that's the way that was running.
I'm not smart. I'm not good enough. I'm not.
Yeah, I'm stupid.
Yeah. To start to listen to the conversation in your head. Slow down enough so you can start to listen to the tape that you're playing. Yeah. Is that what you would say is the first step to start to create this awareness?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a post that you made where you're at, like you got the journal out. See, you just let things roll, man. Let it come out.
Yeah.
Let it come out and you'll start to see patterns. See, the fear. I think it's not hard for people to see where they're doubtful. See, human beings are riddled with fear and doubt. When you think about creating art, it's difficult to create when I'm being doubtful.
Yeah, for sure.
And being that I have to have all the answers, being I have to get perfect. See, that was the thing that rattled in my mind from when I was just a little kid in that ranch was, this is so funny because I look back at it, it's humorous. If you're not going to do it perfect, don't do it at all. But that was like a Chinese handcuffs, man, because...
I hear you. I had a little bit less tough one, but it was, if it's worth doing right. Right. So a little bit less tough, but still not true. Right. Now I say, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing. Maybe it's even worth doing half-assed. Right. Yeah. It's literally might be worth doing half-assed to put something out there. If you only have a half hour to work on it, put it out there with that half hour.
Exactly.
And see what the next step is.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Now, did I answer your question?
Yeah. I think if I boil it down, it's to start to observe your thoughts. And you mentioned journaling. You mentioned just slowing it down enough to listen to yourself and to see how it is that you're listening. What position you're holding when you're listening to yourself? Is it critical? Is it always self-critical? Is what's going on there? And then I would add maybe another one is slow down enough to meditate a little bit. Take 10 minutes of quiet time and see what's, just sit there with your thoughts and try to observe them instead of get carried away by them and notice what's going on. Yes. Might be places to start on this transformation journey.
Yeah. And look, and you can inventory your life. You can do an external inventory because you look at your relationships. And you got to be honest. See, this is the challenge with humans. We're so hard on ourselves. We're judgers.
Yeah.
Like society teaches us to be this way. It's just natural to judge you. That's why there's all these news channels talking smack, right? Because people, for some reason, we get numbed by it, right? So we're judgers. We're hard on ourselves. And we go back to being compassionate with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So we evaluate our lives. Another piece that you evaluate what your life looks like and know that you got something to do with it. So if your relationships are not in order and you think it's because of the way art's been,
right?
Then,
well, the other
then
is.
Yeah, you're not ready yet because
Right.
Art's got something to do with it, but not nearly as much as you think.
Right.
It's who I'm being in the relationship that has it be this way. If I look at my health, somebody asked me a question this weekend, and I've known this guy for a very long time. And he said, man, he says, you look good. He said, you've lost a lot of weight. And of course, people having conversation, right? And I'm like, he said, what have you been doing? It's the wrong guy to ask. Like, what have you been doing? I'm like, well, I said, I get the question, man.
But I'm going to come back with what I'm being.
Yeah, well, that's true because I get the question. And I went through lots of processes and lots of different iterations of being fit. And what it came down to is I had to create it from the inside first. I had to create it from the inside first. So who I'm being fit and healthy. Who I'm being is I'm being an elite athlete. That's who I'm being. What it does is it instructs me what to go do today. I don't have to think about, should I have the chocolate cake? And look, and I might have a piece of chocolate cake, but see, I can move on beyond it pretty quick.
Right.
But it instructs me how to live my life.
Yeah. Should I have the second or third or fourth piece of chocolate cake because I'm feeling fear, or the 20th and 25th Oreo cookie?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I know that's a great message, Bob. I think I'm going to leave it there. I have one other question, but I think this focus on being is really something beautiful that I've taken away from us being together today. I really appreciate it. It helps me learn. With this podcast, I continually have on guests that I think are going to be interesting to me. Tim Ferriss's advice to start with, who's going to be interesting to you, and then have an authentic conversation and see where it goes from there. And that's what I've been following. And this has definitely been a very interesting and inspiring conversation for me. So I want to thank you for that. Last question is, where can people find out more about you and what you're doing with your performance coaching and so forth?
Yeah, you can find me at createdmasterpiece.com.
Createamasterpiece.com?
Createdmasterpiece.com.
Created Masterpiece. That'll be in the show notes as well.
Yeah, and you can find me on Instagram at BobHurd01. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Facebook. The createdmasterpiece.com, that was a website that a client gifted me. I'm a masterpiece. I'm under construction. That's just how it is. And so one day he calls me and said, hey, look in your email. I got you this website. You should have it. So I thought it really is, I believe my life is a work under construction. And man, it's been so much fun. I can't overemphasize how this change, the transformation from a guy that felt unwanted, unlovable, to the most loved man on the planet. I mean, if that's all I ever got out of life, dude.
That's beautiful. And
something
we can all aspire to. So that's wonderful, Bob. Thank you so much for joining us on Life in Transition. I'm really glad that you're here. I really appreciate your wisdom and your vulnerability and the truths that you spoke today, Bob. I really appreciate that.
Art, thank you so much for having me. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate you.
I can't wait to hear what action you are taking. Connect with me on LinkedIn or our website, lifeintransition.online, and let me know. Let a friend know too. It could be a huge encouragement to them and keep you on the track. Thank you so much for joining me today. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and it would mean a lot to me if you left a review and shared this episode with a friend. If you want to learn more about me and what I do when I'm not podcasting, please visit me at artblanchford.com. Thank you for listening. Together, let's make the most of life in transition.